My wife, Sherry, mistakenly thought that I was completely oblivious to her designs. Perhaps she thought I was naive or not knowledgeable enough, especially regarding her growing bond with colleague Todd. She was completely confident that I would passively tolerate her actions and let her deceive me while she continued her affair, but she didn't know that I had been harboring suspicions about her for a long time. I noticed various changes in her behavior, unmistakably indicating infidelity, frequent lateness from work, a sudden wardrobe update towards greater provocativeness, a newfound assertiveness in intimate moments. These were just some of the signs that did not escape my attention, while our shared hobbies were fading and my interest in everything we once held dear was waning. Attempts to solve this problem with her proved futile, as my concerns were ignored over and over again. Sherry, of course, rejected any thoughts of problems, blaming my anxiety on my own insecurity and rampant possessiveness. Having no other choice, I decided to resort to the services of a private detective. I couldn't bear to forget the truth from the very beginning of our relationship. I made it clear that I would never tolerate infidelity. During our 10-year marriage, I have heard these assurances countless times. Therefore, when I found myself in the office of private investigator Jake Sloan and listened to his conclusions, my emotions were combined with relief and apprehension. When he confirmed that Sherry wasn't unfaithful, I was overcome with relief, but the feeling was short-lived when he cautiously mentioned the phrase "bye." According to his explanation, my wife had an affair with Todd, although he had not yet moved into a physical relationship. Sherry and I were the only married partners, no one else. Although some may perceive this as a sweet and innocent expression, for me, it implied having an intimate relationship with someone else. Unfortunately, my suspicions were confirmed. From the private investigator's report, it became known that Sherry and Todd dined exclusively together day after day. They openly demonstrated their affection by holding hands and sitting close together. The investigator provided many photos of them in a tight embrace and sometimes even exchanging kisses. I felt overwhelming rage at the sight before me, consumed by a burning desire to finish off this arrogant individual named Todd. These two lovers not only often shared dinners but also extended their working hours without any reason. It seemed that they were deliberately trying to avoid returning to their own spouses and monopolize as much of our precious time as possible. Every day, the detective informed me that he had managed to trace Sherry's emails and messages, a clear violation of the law that I knew I would never be able to use as evidence in my divorce proceedings. In our state, getting a divorce for adultery was not easy, but a no-fault divorce turned out to be much easier, and I didn't even need proof for that. My intention was purely personal because I just wanted it. Unfortunately, Sloan refused to provide me with copies of these messages. He even declined my request to view them. Instead, he presented me with a generalized version of their contents. He assured me that my wife never spoke ill of me despite Todd's repeated attempts to belittle me. Sherry wouldn't let me do it. Well, it deserves attention. It could have been worse. I think their emails and texts indicated a romantic connection. Although neither of them expressed love explicitly, their conversations were very frank, bordering on explicit. Conversations about intimacy. Todd shared photos of his girlfriend with my wife, and she seemed to like it. She didn't reciprocate by posting pictures of her naked body. As far as I understand, she has not sent any explicit photos yet. As I sat in his office and considered my next steps, Sloan told me the most terrible news. Todd's wife was planning to go to her mother's house in the country for 3 days. During this time, Todd and his mistress saw an opportunity to finally be together in an intimate setting. But the only obstacle in their way was my presence. They didn't know how to spend the night together while I was still around. Considering that I had no intention of leaving the city, their task seemed almost impossible. They were considering various strategies, one of which was to inform me that Sherry was going away for a girls' weekend, only to avoid suspicion. Sherry was worried that I might accidentally find out the truth through one of her friends. She did not want to involve others in creating a plausible myth and abandoned the idea. Subsequently, they considered the idea of forcing me to leave the city. I smiled bitterly, remembering how Sherry had offered to arrange a golf trip with my friends. My lack of interest quickly canceled this opportunity. In the end, they came up with a new, simple strategy: honesty. Todd was convinced that over time I would become a cuckold willing to do anything to keep Sherry as my devoted and contented spouse. He manipulated Sherry into thinking that having an affair with him would somehow improve our intimate life and strengthen our relationship. He tricked her into believing that all she had to do was inform me of her intentions with him, and I would reluctantly agree to that. It was clear to me that this man had no idea who I really was, but what shocked me most was that Sherry had succumbed to his deceptive tactics. She should have known that I would never tolerate this. If she doesn't understand it, Sloan informed me that Sherry is mentally unstable. Knowing this, I agreed with him and went home. I asked Sloan to keep following Sherry's messages and let me know of any updates. Sloan contacted me on Friday and informed me that Sherry was planning to meet with me the following Monday after work. She intended to announce her intention to go on a date with Todd on Friday night. Their date was supposed to start with dinner and dancing and end with them spending the night at a hotel. Then Sherry would prudently come back to me on Saturday. Sherry and Todd carefully rehearsed her entire speech, trying to convince themselves that I would comply with her requests. They knew that my initial reaction would be frustration and anger, but Sherry was determined to assure me that this was just an isolated incident, even though they knew that wasn't the case. She tried to convince me that as a sign of appreciation for my understanding, she would engage in intimacy with me after that. Considering the prolonged absence of an intimate relationship between Sherry and me for several months, she assumed that I would gladly accept Todd's leftovers, believing that I would fulfill her wishes. How thoughtfully they took into account my needs. I had only 48 hours to prepare for the upcoming confrontation. Sherry and Todd jokingly called it an intervention. I firmly decided that everything would not be as she imagined. I decided to turn their intervention into my position. Throughout the weekend, I carefully worked through numerous scenarios, trying to determine how I could save my marriage. At first, I had to think about whether I had the desire to fix it. Uncertainty clouded my mind as I reflected on my feelings for Sherry, and so my course of action took shape by itself. In the end, I decided to face the situation and finally end it. In the early stages of our marriage, Sherry and I seemed to be consumed with joy. Our moments were filled with togetherness, where we shared all aspects of our life experiences. She was not only my closest companion but also my most passionate lover. But over time, it all seemed to disappear into thin air. Perhaps this is an inevitable course of life in which there is nothing permanent. Perhaps my idea of marriage was too traditional and romanticized. I imagined us as partners going through life together, united in an effort to overcome the difficulties that stood in our way. Sherry and I have both experienced failed marriages in the past, which made me doubt that the problem lies with ourselves or with the institution of marriage itself. It seemed unrealistic to expect people to preserve their emotions, desires, interests, and passions when fate seemed to be unpredictable in a society dominated by fleeting periods of attention, rapid progress, digital connectivity, and the constant pursuit of immediate gratification. It is possible that marriage, like dinosaurs and CDs, is outdated. I briefly thought about letting Sherry be with Todd if that's what she really wants, but then reality hit me like a ton of bricks, and I realized I wasn't going to let her take advantage of me. Maybe my feelings for her have faded, but I won't let her manipulate me any further. I'm not going to let Todd take over me by claiming he owns my wife. I won't stand for it. I was ready for a confrontation when my wife contacted me shortly after lunch on Monday. "Hi, Sherry," I began worriedly. "Is everything all right? You rarely call me at work anymore. I hope everything is okay." "Hi, honey," she replied. "Really, honey?" Had she used the same kind word to Todd? "It's nothing special. I just wanted to make sure you get home on time tonight. I need to discuss something very important with you, so I really ask you to be present," I replied and added, "Yes, that's great because I also have important news that I have to share with you." I mentioned that I needed to be home at about 5:15 and asked if it could be done. She did not answer immediately, implying that she was looking for information. Curious, she asked, "Is this important news?" "What kind of news?" I assured her that I would tell her about it in the evening and decided to end the conversation since I was currently engrossed in my monthly report. "I have to finish this quickly so I can leave on schedule. I'll meet you later when we get home." I ended the conversation and headed down the hall to the boss's office to inform him of my plans to take the day off. Fortunately, he didn't object, which was good. I had a few things to do to prepare for this event, so I settled down at the kitchen table. When I heard the garage door open in the house, I was overcome by a mixture of nervousness and anger. Despite my inner turmoil, I tried to keep my outer calm while waiting for Sherry to arrive. I prepared an ice bottle of Sauvignon Blanc and 2 glasses. Just 2 minutes later, she entered the room unaccompanied, casually throwing her keys and purse on the table. I felt a sense of relief when I realized that Todd wasn't accompanying her. The presence of another person would add unnecessary complications. With a smile on my face, I greeted her using the same affectionate address she had used earlier. "Hi, honey," I said warmly. "Welcome home. Would you like some time before we talk, or will we get right to the point?" My immediate impulse to speak caught her off guard. It seems that she expected a gradual approach and was not prepared for such a rush. But I was determined not to give her an advantage. My intention was to keep her on her toes and take her by surprise. She had thought carefully about everything she was going to do and say, so I had to stop her as much as possible. Sherry came over and sat down across from me, saying, "I didn't expect you to be waiting here, but I think if we start earlier, we can get on with our evening faster. Can I share my news with you first, if you don't mind?" I asked, expressing a sense of urgency. She hesitated for a moment before replying, "No, it's okay then. Would you like to have a glass of wine?" I suggested, not giving her a chance to answer. Without waiting for an answer, I quickly poured each of us a glass and put one in front of her. "That would be great," she sighed, took a sip, and finished half of the glass in one fell swoop. As soon as she put down the glass, I refilled it. "So lately, my mind has been busy with one thing," I began. "I'll be blunt. There is no need to prolong this conversation." I deliberately paused, trying to build up tension, and it had the desired effect. Sherry took a step closer, staring at me, and asked, "What's the matter?" Without embellishing, I calmly stated that I wanted to get a divorce. I waited patiently for her to understand the meaning of what was said, which took about 3 seconds. Sherry's expression betrayed her thoughts and feelings. At first, she looked puzzled, as if she was trying to make sense of my words. Then it dawned on her, and she was shocked by the shocking revelation. Surprise quickly turned to waves of fear and anxiety. The disturbing thought of her affair with Todd caused her great fear, but she did not dare to ask why. Terror gripped her. "Why? What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling with fear. When the words came out of my mouth, it felt like I had plunged a dagger into Sherry's heart. "I don't love you anymore," I confessed, puzzled and trying to make sense of my statement. She gasped. "What are you doing?" My statement left her perplexed. "Sherry, I've stopped loving you," I continued carefully, hiding the truth. In fact, I knew exactly when my love for her began to fade. For a long time, I tried to suppress this awareness for as long as possible. Lately, I've been trying more and more to avoid running into this. "What do you mean?" she asked, her face on the verge of tears. I was stunned by her response. "Do you remember the early days of our marriage?" I asked. "Do you remember how we spent every minute together, whether it was a trip to the store, a movie, or just a walk through the mall? We were inseparable. It seemed that we couldn't bear to be apart." She shook her head in agreement. "Yes, I remember," Sherry replied. "Despite being busy, we preferred to have lunch together at least twice a week. The anticipation of finishing work and reuniting at home consumed us every day. I longed for your presence and looked forward to the moment when I could kiss you and, most often, make passionate love. We had common hobbies, even if it meant not wanting to attend the pottery classes that you insisted I participate in." Sherry, staring at me intently, doubted my enthusiasm for pottery. But it was never about the pottery itself. I shared with her how much I enjoyed experiencing it together. Every minute brought me joy. Watching you in action and extending a helping hand filled my heart with delight. Your enthusiasm was contagious, and it made the experience even more special. The same can be said about our time spent coloring these stubborn Christmas village buildings we purchased. About 12 unpainted houses, and together we turned them into an amazing Christmas display. It was painstaking work, but we found pleasure in it. Sherry has always insisted that your creations are superior to mine. Do you remember the countless evenings we spent at the table meticulously applying paint to each tile? Sherry nodded again, remembering the past. There was a time when my love for you knew no bounds. We spent endless hours together, immersed in the art of coloring the huge posters that you collected during your unforgettable trip to Myrtle Beach. It was a time when coloring books for adults had not yet gained popularity, and we had an extensive collection of colorful coloring pens. But like the fate of our love, these pens eventually lost their lives and withered away. The realization of this fact seemed to put a lot of pressure on Sherry, causing her to visibly shrink defensively. She intervened in the conversation, insisting that her love had not diminished. Ignoring her reply, I continued, our friends, envious of our love, often expressed their jealousy. We were inseparable. Our days were filled with long walks hand in hand, whether it's a simple task like buying a new trimmer line at the hardware store. You've always accompanied me, and when you wanted to go get clothes, I reluctantly followed you, waiting patiently at the locker room. But deep down, I knew you despised it. It was evident from the way you were constantly burrowing into your phone, not paying attention to your clothes or my presence. But it didn't matter to me. I found you beautiful in everything you wore. I wasn't there for the clothes but just to be with you. I had the option of staying at home and watching sports, but instead, we discussed how other women in the neighborhood were going to events like bingo or hen parties. But you never expressed any interest in joining them. I remember how you explained the reasons for your non-participation. Sherry wiped a tear from her cheek as the memory came back to her. Yes, I remember, she said. You said you'd rather spend time with me than with other women. We often climbed under the covers and enjoyed watching the movie You're Becoming a Man. I love this movie. Sherry's voice trembled as she spoke, fighting back tears. We've probably watched it hundreds of times, I remarked, filling her glass. Sherry's eyes flashed with determination as she declared, I still want to watch it together. The thought of divorce haunted her, and she confessed, I don't want this to happen. I imagined how we would grow old together, embark on new adventures, for example, take cooking and ballroom dancing lessons, or just enjoy each other's company in bed, lost in the pages of a good book. But now we're separated, Sherry reflected on our situation. I can't say exactly when it all started. I looked deeply into my wife's eyes. My voice was full of emotion. Our daily routine has changed radically. We used to have dinner 2 or 3 times a week, but now it has become a weekly occurrence. The reason for these changes was Sherry. She once claimed that she didn't have enough time to have lunch with me outside the office. It was an invention, a deception. She continued to enjoy lunch outside the office, but with someone else. Gradually, we stopped having lunch together altogether. Instead, I started having lunch with my colleagues. Over time, I found myself enjoying their company too much, perhaps even more than I should have. I may have exaggerated a bit, but I tried not to blame just Sherry. I wanted to prevent her from defending herself and fighting back. This conversation could quickly go downhill or turn into a lecture, and I didn't want that, at least not yet. Moreover, our priorities have shifted, and coming home early to spend time together has lost its significance. We started working later and later, and when we eventually returned home, we often seemed distant or preoccupied. Sherry asked why we hadn't discussed this issue before. If I had known that it mattered to you, I would have made more effort to have lunch with you regularly or to refrain from working late, she said. You are absolutely right, I admitted. Although I have already expressed such thoughts countless times, I long to understand why communicating with me didn't mean the same to you. Perhaps if I understood this, I could change my behavior or take some actions that would encourage you to spend more time with me. It seemed that the blame for our growing distance lay with me, but such a perception could not be further from reality. I knew that by starting a confrontation with Sherry through Todd, I would only aggravate the situation and prevent any possibility of a civilized discussion. I realized that I would look like a possessive and insecure person. Failing to convey my point of view to her, therefore, for revealing my knowledge, I wanted her to reflect on those wonderful moments that we shared and think about her contribution to their destruction. Over time, our once indissoluble bond gradually weakened. You started attending hen parties, and I started participating in night parties on weekends. You went to the spas, and I found solace in playing golf. Sherry, we used to spend endless hours together, not wasting a minute discussing the weather or the latest news. Unfortunately, our intimate life has also suffered a lot, we often find ourselves too tired or disinterested to engage in physical intimacy. In the early days of our marriage, our passion knew no bounds. We were inseparable, making love 4 or 5 times a week, sometimes even several times a day. I snuggled up to you while you were cooking, and we refused dinner to indulge each other's desires. All night, our trips to the jacuzzi were a common thing, always filled with laughter and joy. But it's been over a year since we last enjoyed this simple pleasure, Sherry retorted. I thought you didn't want to make love anymore. I was stunned, not understanding where she got such a misconception. It seemed like she was trying to justify her own actions by shifting the blame onto me. Grinning, I quickly reassured her, no, not at all. I've never stopped craving intimacy. My desire to make love is as strong as it was 10 years ago. But the truth was that I no longer wanted intimacy with her. Admitting this would undoubtedly have caused me deep mental pain, since she believed that she had rejected me in an intimate way. The irony was that now I was explaining the lack of a physical connection by saying that I was not interested in it. The situation was almost comical, if not for the huge pain I felt inside. Sherry's voice faltered as she asked, clearly taken aback by my answer, so you didn't want intimacy with me? My words came out without much thought. I lost interest because it seemed to me that you weren't participating. You didn't show any excitement or desire to explore new things. It seemed that you just wanted to finish this lesson as soon as possible in order to return to your other hobbies, such as knitting. And I was still longing for those passionate weekend meetings we used to have. You didn't even want me to give you pleasure, Sherry. Our intimate meetings lack thrills. Unaware of this, I resorted to pretending to speed up the process. Sherry objected, claiming that I wasn't careful during intimacy. But don't you remember how you insisted on using contraceptives despite taking birth control? You said it would be more convenient, despite the fact that it was unpleasant for me to use contraceptives. Your persistence did not give me the opportunity to pretend to be satisfied, I said calmly, stepping up my manipulations. It's not about you, it's about me, I continued. Her gaze lingered on me for a brief moment, her tears subsided, and her complexion turned rosy. It was hard to tell if it was anger, disappointment, or humiliation. To relieve the tension, I filled her glass with a fresh portion. She grabbed the drink and took a generous sip. After a few seconds, I continued talking, knowing full well that the search for a new company was inevitable. But she didn't understand that I wasn't referring to myself. In a fit of rage, she asked sharply, "Are you cheating on me? Have you fallen in love with someone else?" Sherry, you are well aware of my position on infidelity. When we exchanged vows on our wedding day, I made you a solemn promise, and I am sincerely ready to fulfill it. I understand the pain caused by your previous husband's infidelity, just as I experienced the agony of my first wife's secret affair with a colleague. I would never betray you in this way, just as I'm sure you would never try to raise my ego. How could you even think of such a thing? I said calmly. I'm sorry, she repented. You're right. I'm sure you would never behave like that. She looked contrite, avoiding eye contact, and her trembling hands betrayed her concern. Let's refrain from intimacy until the divorce. I delicately mentioned that I had found someone else. This brings me to an important statement. I have already met with a lawyer and completed all the necessary paperwork. You'll be served on Friday, I said calmly. There was confusion and despair in her voice. Wait, what? I couldn't help but smile and repeated, I told you that you will be handed the divorce papers on Friday. It's for the best, really. That way, we can both regain our freedom and follow our own desires. I tried to reason, hoping she would understand. But she categorically disagreed, stating, these 10 years have not been a waste of time for me. Urging her to see the truth, I begged, come on, Sherry, deep down, I believe that you want this as much as I do. Let's face it. It's been a long time since you wanted to be by my side. Our wedding is a decision you regret. I'm not the person you really want to be with. But she did not agree, saying that she did not want a divorce. It's not as simple as just wanting it. You can't initiate a divorce based on your desires alone. I don't want a divorce. I want to stay married to you indefinitely. My love for you is still strong, she said firmly. I'm sorry, Sherry, but my love for you has faded. Fortunately, we live in a state where divorce is no fault, so we can split our property equally and both get a fair share. There is a small chance that we will be able to get more than half of the property, but only if one of us commits adultery and we can definitively prove adultery. But none of us are cheating, and it's unlikely that we'll resort to such actions before Friday, right? Therefore, we can part cleanly and amicably. I would appreciate it if you would come to the bank with me tomorrow so that we can split the funds equally from all our accounts. In addition, we will need to open new accounts, get new credit cards, and update all utility bills. Furthermore, we will need to sell the house, and a realtor will arrive on Wednesday to put it up for sale, I said. You're in too much of a hurry. Sherry's voice filled the room with disappointment. I'm at a loss. Please stop, she begged, her scream echoing off the walls. Don't worry, I've already packed my things. I will stay in a hotel until I find a permanent place to move, I calmly assured her. You can stay here until the house is sold. But Sherry's desperation grew. Wait, damn it, she screamed, please wait. There is no need to hurry. Is that right? We shouldn't put it off any longer. We have to take care of everything by Friday, don't we? Why? What's so important about Friday? She demanded, her voice full of curiosity and disappointment. Are you planning to go on a date with your lover, Todd, on Friday? I think you mentioned that you would spend the night at the hotel together. Sherry reacted instantly. Her eyes widened in shock, and her mouth was open. She tried to speak, but only a faint hiss escaped from her throat. Doubts began to creep into my head. Had I confused the day? Trying to clarify the situation, I quickly grabbed a folder hidden under a stack of Better Homes and Gardens magazines and opened it. I took the private investigator's summary report out of my pocket and discreetly handed it to Sherry. I drew her attention to a specific section detailing her intention to meet with Todd on Friday evening. Look, I said, pointing at the text, it clearly states here that you and Todd have a reservation at the Gaylord Texas Hotel for Friday night. Sherry tried to object, but I interrupted her. Before you say anything, let me ask you, do I need to remind you of the photos of you and Todd kissing during lunch? Where our eyes met, tears flowed down her face again. I'm so sorry, she whispered softly. Smiling broadly, I confessed, I clearly remember the very moment when my love for you faded away. It was the day I found out about your plans to betray me, to turn me into a cuckold like my ex-wife did. Forgive me, my love, she stammered, and there was despair in her words. Todd means nothing to me. This is just a fleeting affair, an attempt to revive our relationship. I will only spend tonight with him. Let's spend the rest of the weekend in a way that revives the passionate intimacy we once shared, as Todd suggested. He believes it will awaken and revitalize our intimate connection. It upsets you that instead of indulging in passion with me, you seek satisfaction elsewhere to revitalize our relationship. Does this logic make sense? She formulated her thoughts with difficulty and changed her approach. Todd said that you would consider this option if it would bring me happiness, and I sincerely want you to be happy, I assured her. I want our happiness to be restored as before. It pains me to imagine that you will find happiness with someone else. Are you thinking wrong? How could you believe that I would accept such a situation? But she tried to rationalize her action somehow. She claimed that it would not be considered infidelity, that I would not betray her. She insisted on getting my consent. That's never going to happen in this life, I said firmly. Now I realize that I should have realized this truth from the very beginning. I don't know exactly what I was thinking. Perhaps it was due to my state of boredom and loneliness. Todd has rekindled my interest. But how could I feel bored and lonely when we were deeply in love and cherished every moment we spent together? It's unclear, but these feelings have resurfaced. Have you ever thought that you were bored and lonely because you pulled away from us? You stopped having lunch with me, stopped participating in events and spending time together. You made the decision to distance yourself from me and voluntarily put yourself in this situation. Instead of spending time with me, you chose to be with him. So when you felt bored and isolated, it was a consequence of your own actions, I said. I don't think I could do that, she said, meeting my gaze. She shook her head in disbelief. No, I can't imagine that I would intentionally create such a scenario. I thought you stopped coming to my place for lunch. Remember, this was done on your initiative. You constantly claimed that you were too busy on Wednesday, the day appointed for our lunch. I came to pick you up, but to my disappointment, you didn't even bother to tell me personally that you couldn't come. Instead, you sent me a text message telling me to go to lunch without you. This incident upset me, and as a result, I stopped participating in our lunch plans. Surprisingly, you never acknowledged or paid attention to the fact that our dinners had stopped. It seems like you didn't know about this development, I continued. Sherry sighed and looked down at her hands, feeling a sense of sadness. Your preoccupation with your own world, in particular, your attention to Todd, made you not notice that you were gradually losing me. You were completely absorbed in yourself and your relationship with Todd. Well, now it will belong entirely to you, she snapped, fixing me with a steady gaze. I want you. I want us. I long for us to go back to what we were before. I deeply regret my mistakes. I abandoned our relationship, but it's too late, I replied, shaking my head. You can't believe it. I've never betrayed you. We didn't cross any boundaries, and I promise never to meet him again. I'm even ready to quit my job and find a job elsewhere. Please, I can't accept losing you. I still love you, even though I feel betrayed in every way except one. But this is the most important aspect. We did not enter into any intimate relationship. I made a stupid decision. I was in love with Todd, but I didn't love him. My love has always been only for you. I can't understand what was going on in my head. In the end, I would leave him and come back to you when everything was settled. But it's over now. Now I see it clearly and admit my stupidity. Todd has no meaning in my life. Please, my love, don't leave me. It's not that simple, Sherry. I made a terrible mistake. I tried to do it, but you intervened before I could go too far. But you went over the limit, and I expressed my disagreement. A simple physical encounter could strengthen our bond. I have not committed any illegal actions. We were just friends, as he said. You should have put our love above everything else, I objected. I have many girlfriends, but I refrain from physical intimacy with them. I've never wasted my time on them, and I haven't traded you for any of them. Moreover, I had no intention of sleeping with them and forcing you to put up with it. Sherry put her head in her hands, bursting into sobs. I said sincerely, I regret that I ignored you and took you for granted. I promise it will never happen again. Can we please consider this as a significant mistake and find the strength in our hearts to forgive me? This situation is not a game like Monopoly, where a free card can send you to jail. I want you to understand that your actions were not just a mistake. You walked away from our love and gave your heart to someone else. At the same time, I want to clarify that my heart has always belonged to you, and you did not allow me to go further with it. I can't believe it. Do you really care about me so much that you can't defend our love? Am I really that insignificant to you? You were my everything, and I was ready to fight for you with anyone. I would even give my life for you. But now, I wouldn't even bother to acknowledge you if you were in trouble. Sherry's scream pierced the air, and she desperately clutched at my arms, trying to pull me to her. No, please, don't think like that. I'm really sorry, her words echoed, and I couldn't help but reply, I think I believe you're sorry. It shows me that you are not completely self-centered and heartless. Please, could you change your mind? I beg you not to end the relationship, Sherry. It was solely your decision, and although I believe that you sincerely repent, it does not change the result. My love for you has faded, our relationship is over. But don't get upset, you still have Todd, who will be there to comfort you, Sherry confessed between sobs. Then, she dropped a bombshell. Todd was married, and he only wanted a physical connection, not a serious relationship. I grinned and replied, well, maybe now his point of view will change. I am sure that when he returned home today, his wife probably had something to discuss with him. It's interesting that she and I hired the same divorce lawyer. Sherry's surprise was obvious when she once again opened her jaw, trying to provide concrete evidence. I pushed a folder across the table to her. It contains the full report of the investigators, accompanied by vivid photos of you and Todd. Rest assured, his wife has a duplicate of this very folder. In addition, you will find all the necessary information from my lawyer regarding the divorce proceedings and the proposed division of property. It would be wise if you read all the contents, I said earnestly. Please, my love, refrain from such actions. If you want to accompany me to the bank tomorrow, please call me and let me know, I said, getting up from the table and leaving the room, ignoring my wife's anguished screams. Sherry was having a hard time dealing with the difficulties of our divorce. I was determined to avoid a lengthy and costly legal dispute. Therefore, when the judge recommended seeking help from a marriage counselor, I agreed without hesitation. Surprisingly, the consultation turned out to be more useful than I expected. Sherry and I successfully reconnected with our emotions and began to communicate openly and without judgment about every aspect of our lives. I was able to express the pain and humiliation I felt because of my wife's actions. Our consultant praised our progress during the therapy sessions. But I couldn't forget Sherry. I even had a desire for revenge against her. I suggested that she quit her job, saying that maybe I would come back to her. But my plans were completely different. I wanted her to lose a promising job. Sherry refused to quit, and then I had to divorce her because of adultery. As a result, she had a smaller share of everything she had acquired during our marriage. To her surprise, when Tor divorced his wife, he showed no interest in her and began dating a younger woman. It's been over 2 years since Sherry and I divorced. I'm happy, enjoying life in different women, and Sherry is actively looking for someone to start a family with. But no one is interested in her as a wife. She is only a temporary toy for many men. Story 2. I must admit that this year has been difficult, not only for my wife Lori but for everyone else. I devoted 16 years of my career to Van Screw and Nut, where we specialized in custom fasteners. Unlike ordinary consumers, companies that produce goods cannot simply buy screws at the nearest hardware store. Everything must be tailored to their specific requirements. At first, I started working in the sales department and gradually grew to be a sales manager. It was a fantastic position that provided both job satisfaction and substantial income. I consistently fulfilled all 4 quarterly quotas, as I have always strived for excellence in my role. I expected that at the end of the year, I would receive a bonus exceeding $100,000. But the constant transfer of manufacturers abroad created problems as we sought to maintain our market share. Despite this, thanks to my efforts to assemble a dedicated and hardworking sales team, we consistently outperformed the previous year. About a year ago, an unexpected meeting was called, which brought together all the key figures of the company, including me. The news of the retirement of the company's owner and the ongoing secret negotiations with a California conglomerate to acquire our company stunned all of us. We were sure that everything would remain unchanged when our company was sold and a new CEO would take its place. We were assured that our positions were securely protected, and there would be no changes in the leadership. Unfortunately, this turned out to be a misleading statement. Less than 2 months later, the first signs of problems appeared. Employees began to be fired, realizing the impending doom. I immediately started looking for an alternative job, but fate decreed otherwise. I was abruptly fired without being allowed to find another job. They pretended to be sympathetic, patted me on the back, and offered me a generous severance package of $10,000, and then, without further ado, they escorted me out the door. At first, Lori and I weren't too worried about the state of the economy. But over time, I began to realize the extent of the changes that had occurred over the years when I worked in comfortable conditions. It became obvious that not only had most of the production facilities moved abroad, but even those domestic companies that managed to survive were now buying fasteners abroad. I couldn't help but wonder how our economy was managing to remain resilient, but that was no longer my main concern. My attention shifted to finding a job. It was during this period that Lance, our 17-year-old son, became an important part of our history. When he was finishing his studies at school, I was overwhelmed by a wave of conflicting emotions when I learned about his decision to join the Army immediately after graduation. The unstable situation in the Middle East fueled my fears for his safety, and the thought of his absence weighed heavily on our hearts. But amid these fears, there was a glimmer of relief when the realization came that we would not have to bear the financial burden of college expenses. The harsh reality of being fired just 5 months later destroyed all hopes of getting another job with a 6-figure salary. Therefore, I changed my aspirations, setting myself more achievable goals. Lori and I were both looking for a solution to temporary financial difficulties. Surprisingly, she managed to find a job before me. She got a job as a low-level secretary at a software development company. The salary was not very large, but still exceeded the amount of my unemployment benefit. Eventually, about a month after Lori started working, I managed to get a job as a salesman at Henry Automotive, a company specializing in the sale of car parts. At the initial stage of my studies, my income was just symbolic, but after graduation, I was officially employed at Henry Automotive. I was offered a job that combined a fixed salary and commission, but it was clear from the very beginning that this would not be a highly lucrative position. Surprisingly, the highest paid salesman in the company worked there for 12 years and earned only $60,000 a year. Such income inequality greatly affected our financial situation, creating a significant burden on the budget. We used to enjoy the luxury associated with a well-off lifestyle, lived in a comfortable house with a stable mortgage, and owned 2 Cadillacs, one of which was still being paid off. Fortunately, the 5-year-old CTS was mine. Lori and I bought a car of the same model just a few months before I lost my job. In addition, most of our credit cards have already been exhausted. Our usual evenings out of town were also skipped, but there was also a positive aspect to this situation. We thought that if we can't enjoy life, then why do we need money? We often went out, had dinner with friends, danced, attended shows, plays, and concerts. These outings were far from ordinary dates. We just let ourselves go and had a great time when we wanted to. This unfortunate circumstance, which happened 2 or 3 times a month and sometimes more often, was one of the first victims of our efforts to reduce staff. Oddly enough, Lori was more affected by it than I was. Her family was educated and had more financial resources than mine. Unlike me, who only started enjoying life and finding entertainment when I was a student, Lori always enjoyed the company of her parents, throwing parties with them as if it were an innate instinct. But the countless months during which she did not leave our house began to tire Lori, prompting her to express her dissatisfaction. For her, the bills could be postponed for later. It all started about 3 months ago. She expressed her concern, demanding some kind of action. Sitting at home night after night and doing nothing was driving her crazy. She longed to go outside and experience the pleasure she had once received. Lori was constantly having difficulty in situations like this. Meanwhile, I was sitting at the kitchen table, scrupulously reviewing our financial obligations. Gradually but surely, we were getting out of a difficult financial situation. Looking at my amazing wife, I sarcastically replied, "Of course, it's not a problem at all. Please tell me which bills should be left unpaid." Her gaze remained fixed on me, and I didn't know how she would react. At one point, I expected her to scream, but she seemed lost in her own thoughts. Instantly, I regretted my words as a wave of nausea swept over me. In fact, my request was not as terrible as it seemed at first. "I'm sorry, honey," I apologized, hoping to relieve the tension. "I promise it won't always be like this. I will continue to look for a better job. But for now, let's try to relax a little." "Relax," she growled back. "Skylar, it's been almost a year since we've been rushing things. I'm starting to feel trapped, like an animal in a cage. I really need to break free and find some fun." "I understand, my love." "I understand," I assured her, trying to calm her worries. "Look, we have a lot of catching up to do. 5 months ago, we were late on payments for the house and for the second car. We were so close to." I gestured at the small gap between my thumb and forefinger. "We almost got your car back. Fortunately, we will be fine with the commissions for this month, except for one payment for the car. If we manage to reduce the cost of food, then in 2 months, we will be in an advantageous position." I noticed that Lori's lips were pressed tightly together, indicating her displeasure, and I understood perfectly well why. Suddenly, a brilliant idea came to my mind. "How about you and I visit the Lincoln Park Zoo this weekend? It's free, and we haven't been there since Lance was a kid." "Skylar, I'm not interested in communing with nature. I want to immerse myself in the life of the city," she said with a grin. "I want to enjoy food, drinks, and dancing until I can't stand anymore. My love, I ask you to be patient a little longer. I assure you, as soon as we settle all our financial obligations, we will celebrate this event with a delicious dinner in one wonderful place." Without saying another word, she gracefully climbed the stairs. I couldn't help but sigh to myself. Although I felt remorse, I couldn't ignore the fact that we were in Chicago. Considering the expensive parking and lunch for the two of us, dinner in this city easily cost a couple hundred or even more. Growing up in a family where paying bills was a priority, this thought is deeply ingrained in me. Given our current financial situation, I couldn't find a reasonable excuse to spend such a significant amount of money. Further complicating the situation was the fact that we were constantly trying to catch up, and every month we barely kept up with the minimum credit card payments. It took me another 10 minutes to complete the task. I originally planned to watch the news, but then realized that Lori was still upstairs, worried. I decided to check it out before doing anything else. When I entered our bedroom, I found her sitting on the edge of the bed, tears streaming down her face. At that moment, I couldn't help but feel like a terrible person. Without hesitation, I sat down next to her, gently hugged her, and pulled her to me, hoping to comfort her somehow. "I'm sorry, dear." "I'm doing my best," I murmured gently, pressing my cheek against the top of her head. She snorted and admitted, "I understand. This year has been incredibly difficult. In Lance's absence, we could run away for the weekend. Instead, we were trapped in this place, almost like a prison." I remember hearing that Dee's prison was dismantled. She chuckled involuntarily, averting her gaze. If she had been observant, she would have noticed the rage on my face. Our house was far from a prison. In fact, I never intended to buy it. I thought it was too big and expensive. But as soon as she looked at it, she fell in love and insisted that it belonged to her. Now I'm fighting for the right to own it, and she pejoratively calls it a prison. At that moment, I was faced with a choice. I could either express my true thoughts about her analogy or just walk away. I chose the latter. Over the next 2 months, my relationship with Lori deteriorated further. Our conversations became shorter and meaningless, and we gradually spent less and less time together in the same room. The frequency of our lovemaking gradually decreased, and Lori's involvement decreased. What used to be cries of passion have now turned into sorrowful sobs, and the charm that once filled our bedroom has disappeared. Lori made it clear that she was unhappy that I hadn't asked her out, but circumstances prevented me from doing so. Undoubtedly, we both craved at least some kind of release. Although I understood her feelings, it seemed to me that our bills had to be paid first. Assurances that she would spend the night in the city did little to calm her discontent. Eventually, the tension reached its peak on Friday evening after we finished work. When I arrived home, my spirits lifted. The excitement of signing a lucrative contract overwhelmed me, and I knew that it would allow me to enjoy precious moments with my beloved wife. Unfortunately, I hadn't had time to share this news with her yet. As soon as I crossed the threshold of the house, I saw her gracefully descending the stairs, dressed in an outfit befitting a big holiday. Amazed, I said, "Wow," watching her radiant presence. I couldn't help but wonder the reason for her gorgeous appearance, to which she replied, "I'm meeting with my work colleagues." "Don't worry about it." With a hint of sarcasm in her tone, she said, "They pay for everything." From the very beginning, something seemed untrue to me. A feeling of anxiety instantly gripped me. As far as I knew, Lori had never cheated on me. But there was no point in dressing up in the most revealing dress from her wardrobe just to hang out with her girlfriends. After all, my wife was a proud and independent woman. The idea that she accepts the generosity of her friends and pays for everything seemed to me a form of charity. It was only when she was dating another man that she would let someone pay the bill for the entire evening. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, reinforcing my suspicions. "So who are these girls? Can you tell me their names?" It's strange that she wasn't bothered by my question. She just said they were some girls from the office, and I don't know any of them. "But, Lori, you haven't answered my question. I may not be naive, but I can understand when something is wrong. You don't usually dress up to go out with your girlfriends. So who are you really dating? Is that a guy?" "Come on, don't be silly," she replied casually. "I've already told you that I'm dating girls. If you don't believe me, there's nothing I can do about it." You're just being overly cautious because you feel guilty. Suddenly, a car horn caught my attention. I looked out and noticed a taxi parked outside our house. Are you taking a taxi? I asked. Yes, but today I plan to have a good time. We definitely can't afford drunk driving, so I thought it would be wise, she replied. I was indignant. Do girls also participate in expenses? I asked. She answered honestly, actually, yes. She bent down and gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. There are leftovers from last night's dinner in the fridge. You can heat them up in the microwave. I may be delayed. You don't have to worry about waiting. And having said these parting words, she went out the door. I looked around, hoping to catch the presence of an outsider in the car, but when she smoothly settled into the back seat, it turned out that she was unaccompanied. For a while, I tried to deny what had happened. Of course, I understood that Lori was upset, but the idea that my wife was really involved with another man was hard to accept. After all, we had a child, and our lives were intertwined. I reassured myself that she would never betray me, it just couldn't be true. I hurriedly took out the leftovers from the refrigerator and put them in the microwave, trying to distract myself from the emotions that overwhelmed me. As the food warmed up, so did my anxiety. Desperately clinging to the hope that she was just having fun with colleagues, I tried to convince myself of this unlikely scenario. But deep down, doubts crept in. I hurriedly went to the computer, determined to find the answers. I found the taxi service's contact information and dialed the number. When the dispatcher answered, I urgently requested information about the location of a taxi that had recently left my house. Without hesitation, I gave my address, mindful of possible privacy issues. To my surprise, the person on the other end of the line readily provided me with the required information. I was familiar with the Plato House located at Elmhurst Road. In fact, Lori and I have already visited this place several times. It had an atmosphere of romance. The restaurant and the adjacent bar were decorated with intimate, dimly lit corners. It wasn't the kind of place a woman usually chooses to have fun with her friends. Rather, it seemed ideal for a man to seduce his companion. When the bell rang, announcing the arrival of dinner, a knot the size of a ball formed in my stomach. I used to believe that in difficult times, husbands and wives should support each other, not turn on each other. It was frustrating to discover that this was not always the case. Moreover, I even thought about going to Plato's restaurant for dinner alone. This establishment had two separate entrances, one led to the living room and the other to the restaurant. To avoid communicating with the hostess, I decided to enter through the living room. Since I wasn't interested in drinks, I walked past the bar and straight into the restaurant section. The sight of my wife sitting at a table with another man made my heart skip a beat. When she was sitting facing me, her identity was unmistakably established. They were chatting while enjoying snacks accompanied by a bottle of wine placed next to them. Anger surged through my veins. Focusing my gaze on the man who was trying to have an affair with my wife, I walked aggressively towards him. Although he was only a short distance away, the man, whom I called Mr. Slick, seemed to sense my presence. He hesitated, raised his head, and met my gaze, his confidence replaced by nervousness. I was standing just a few feet away from them, and Lori looked back to see what had caught her lover's attention. "Skylar," she exclaimed, her voice full of surprise. "What are you doing here?" I couldn't help but intervene. My words were laced with contempt. "I've come to meet your girlfriends." I stared at the man, anger in my eyes. "And who is this?" he replied, slowly getting up from his seat. "Tell me the reason," I warned, a threat in my voice. "You know perfectly well that she is married. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" I chuckled. "Tell me, do you leave a trail of slime behind you when you crawl?" He looked uncertain, not knowing what action to take. He remained in a semi-reclining position, neither fully standing nor fully sitting, until my wife intervened. "Skylar, please don't make a scene," she begged. "This is Jerry, my colleague. Since you were hesitant to ask me out," he kindly volunteered. He was just trying to be kind. Displeased, I grumbled, "Don't tell me this wonderful nonsense. He is only interested in having an intimate relationship with you." Looking at Jerry again, I realized that he had decided not to dispute my statement but returned to his seat. If you dare to make even one move towards my wife again, you will have to deal with me, I warned. Let's go. Your evening is over, I told my wife. She hesitated a bit but, like Jerry, decided not to push me any further. I'm sorry, she told him, getting up from her seat. It seemed like all the eyes in the neighborhood were on us as I took her hand and led her to the exit. Silence enveloped us in the car, but as soon as we entered the house, the atmosphere completely changed. Lori, could you explain what just happened? Have you suddenly decided that I am no longer worthy to be your husband? I just wanted to get out of the house and have some fun for a change. By the way, who is this man Jerry? How long have you been dating? I asked, feeling my anger rising. He's just a colleague I work with, and we haven't gone beyond a few dinners together. Nothing else. I told him that our relationship has changed compared to what it was before, and that I miss it. He offered to go out to dinner and dance, and I agreed. Oh, come on, beat me up, she quipped. I was stunned, almost at a loss. I never expected this. I believed our marriage was more solid than that. We're going through difficult times, and are you ready to abandon ship? I asked, feeling a mixture of shock and disappointment. Who said anything about quitting? I also work tirelessly every day. I deserve to have fun sometimes. If you don't want to accompany me, why should I refuse someone who agrees? She replied defiantly. Disappointed, I exclaimed, because you're my wife, damn it. We have to work together as a team, and that's why I'm so upset. But she didn't say anything, and her expression clearly indicated that she was mocking my words. So, that's what awaits me in our marriage? Being married to a man I can't trust? Do I have to constantly worry about your location and actions when you disappear from my sight? Please, enlighten me. What were your intentions for the rest of the evening? Did you plan to have an intimate relationship with him? I asked, full of apprehension. She replied sharply, of course not. When I looked at the woman who has been my partner for almost 2 decades, I was overcome by an uneasy feeling. For the first time, I doubted her trustworthiness. I can't believe you, I expressed my disbelief. It dawned on me that she had deceived me when she claimed to be spending time with her friends, and it didn't even bother her that I doubted her words at the time. So why should I trust her now? Of course, the past year has been difficult, but a wife should stand firmly by her husband. Do you remember the oath we exchanged at the altar? In good times and bad, in sickness and in health? At that very moment, I was seized with doubt. I found myself in a state of complete clarity. Our marriage has come to an end, I said firmly. But this time, her mockery took on a verbal form. Ignoring my statement, she replied in a dismissive tone, "Don't be silly. We're having financial difficulties, remember? You can't afford a lawyer, let alone a divorce. To be honest, you can't even afford to move out." Although I was eager to give a smart answer, I was speechless from the shock. It became obvious that she no longer loves or respects me, and unfortunately, some people just don't know how to handle such situations. After almost 2 decades, my marriage collapsed in one unexpected moment. Despite the fact that tears threatened to overwhelm me, I was seized with burning anger. Without saying a word, I went upstairs, resolutely gathering my things. Lori, after a considerable delay, finally came over to find out what I was doing. "What does it all mean?" "What is it?" she asked sharply. "I may not be able to buy you dinner, but it looks like you don't mind spending the night at a motel," I replied. A burst of disappointment burst from her lips, and she turned around and stormed out of the room. Bright Automotive mainly transferred the production of inventory abroad, although some of the goods were produced in-house. Next to the office, there was a compact factory equipped with a spacious shower room where employees could refresh themselves before going home. In addition, the reception area of the office building was decorated with a cozy sofa. At that moment, all I needed was a shower and a place to rest. When I went downstairs with my suitcase, Lori was already in the kitchen. Even though she called out to me when she heard the door open, I hurriedly continued on my way, not wanting to listen to what she had to say. I hurriedly threw my clothes into the car and hit the road. As soon as I drove a mile away from the starting point, my mobile phone broke the tranquility of the trip. Wearing a seatbelt, it remained out of reach, and I had to switch the call to voicemail. But curiosity quickly got the better of me and made me listen to the message. Arriving at the hotel office, I took my phone out of my pocket, thinking about the upcoming conversation. My mind was waiting for Lori's tearful apologies and desperate pleas, but to my surprise, that wasn't what I heard. "Skylar, your behavior resembles that of a child. I have made it clear that I do not intend to have an intimate relationship with Jerry, and I stand by my opinion. Your reaction, demanding to bring me home in such a manner, was unexpected and inappropriate. In an effort to maintain confidentiality, I left all my personal belongings in the car, taking only the most necessary things with me. It seemed unnecessary to make my personal affairs known to everyone at work. Despite the early hour, I took refuge in the break room, trying to distract myself by watching TV. Unfortunately, my problems didn't stop, and I couldn't help but think about what might have happened if I had decided not to accompany her to the restaurant. Would she have returned home after dancing a little? I guess I'll never know for sure, but I had my suspicions. Even so, that slug Jerry didn't strike me as a man who would give up easily. I had a feeling that at some point in the future, he would be able to seduce her. In the end, I gave up trying to watch anything and decided to set the alarm for an earlier time so that I could take a shower and get dressed before the workers arrived at the factory at 7 o'clock. Trying to fall asleep, I thought about my next steps. Lori was right, I had no money for a lawyer or even for an apartment. I needed to find a solution. Lori's contempt for our marriage and for me as a person was obvious, but I refused to admit defeat and obediently returned home. To my surprise, the alarm clock woke me up the next morning, and I couldn't believe how peacefully I was sleeping on this uncomfortable couch. It seemed to me like a torture device. After taking a shower and getting dressed, I decided to pass the time with a relaxed breakfast at Denny's restaurant. As I was sipping my 4th cup of coffee, a sudden realization struck me like lightning, offering a way out of my predicament. It was incredibly simple, and I couldn't believe I hadn't thought of it before. Standing in the parking lot, I quickly grabbed my cell phone and took a picture. As soon as I got settled at my desk, I wasted no time posting an ad. 2 days later, I decided to take the day off to run a few errands, since I knew that Lori would be busy with work. I drove up to our house and rummaged through our personal filing cabinet to find the necessary documents. I didn't forget to bring a spare set of keys before I left. Towards noon, I checked into a motel and dialed Lori's number. As soon as she realized I was calling, she resumed her tirade. "Finally! Have you finished your little seizure? It amazes me that you couldn't raise enough money to buy me dinner, but you managed to afford a 2-day stay at a motel," she said. "Actually," I interjected, "I'm staying at the office." "In the office?" she asked, clearly taken aback. "Yes," I confirmed. "They have a shower, a cozy sofa, and even a room with a TV. All the amenities are like at home," I boasted, although my words were far from the truth. In the same spirit, she replied, "Well, this is completely absurd. Please drop your stubbornness and come home, Lori. I've made it clear that our marriage is over. I'm only calling to tell you that you need to be taken back." "What? Why? What happened to your car?" she asked. "Nothing," I replied. "Your car works much better than mine." There was a slight pause while she undoubtedly tried to make sense of my words. "Skylar, what do you want to say?" "I sold my car and got $188,000 for it. I have enough money to cover the cost of hiring a divorce lawyer and make a down payment on the condo. But since I'm in sales, I need a car, so I borrowed yours today. I visited our house and took my license and spare keys from both cars, including yours." Upon hearing this, Skylar exclaimed, expressing concern about the lack of a means of transportation. "But since both cars are registered in my name, I have every right to do so. Rest assured, I didn't take any unaccounted for items. Besides, all the bills for this month have already been paid. There are only a few funds left. If you stick to your budget, you should have enough money for food and transportation. If you run out of money, I think Jerry will be happy to buy you dinner, provided that you fulfill his wishes." Instantly, she expressed her distress with a heavy sigh. "Skylar, please consider your actions. I never thought that you would stoop to such an extent. I apologize for my mistake in going on a date with Jerry, but I was furious. Honestly, nothing terrible will happen. Lori, you tricked me by secretly going on a date with another man. You treated me with contempt and did not repent when I confronted you. It's quite obvious, Lori, that you don't love or respect me. Skylar, I'm sorry. I also apologize. We had a good relationship when it was easy, but we let each other down when we faced difficulties, she said, and I was startled by the sound of sobbing coming from the other end of the phone. But it didn't matter anymore, he continued. The house is registered in both our names. The only valuable property we have should be sold without delay. She listened to me with disbelief. Sell our house, Skylar? Is this really necessary? Lori, we've made up the mortgage payments, but I can't afford to keep the house anymore, and you won't be able to cover the monthly installments either. Unfortunately, it needs to be sold urgently. I calculated that each of us would be able to get $50 or $60,000. With this money, you can buy yourself a decent used car and find an apartment. Skylar, I don't want to get divorced. Can we please discuss this further? I'm sorry, Lori, but your wishes are no longer a priority. You should contact a realtor, or would you rather I do it? The final scene, Lori stood on the sidewalk outside the house and looked up at the overcast sky. The distant cries of geese flying north served as a gentle reminder of the approach of spring. She was making her way through the slushy snow to her old Honda and heading to Starbucks to reunite with an old friend. She was filled with anticipation of meeting Julia. It was a typical Chicago winter, characterized by low temperatures, heavy snowfall, and treacherous roads. As a result, Lori spent most of her time in her apartment, except when she had to go to work. But on this day, she decided to break the monotony and visit her friend Julie. When she entered the cozy cafe, Julie had already taken a small table in the corner, leisurely enjoying her latte. The friends greeted each other warmly and kissed each other affectionately on the cheek. Standing in line for a Colombian drink, Lori couldn't help but dream about having a nice time outdoors and reuniting with her dear friend. Finally holding a steaming cup of coffee in her hands, Lori returned to the table where Julie was eagerly awaiting her arrival. As she entered, she was greeted by a warm smile and a friendly voice. Lori, how nice to see you after such a long break, Julie exclaimed, with a faint hint of sadness in her voice. Yes, it's been too long. I don't go out so much anymore, Lori replied nostalgically. Ah, those were simpler times. Unfortunately, I no longer have the means to attend parties. Intrigued, Julie asked further, what about dating? Do you remember those times when you dated a charming man who took care of everything? With a note of amusement, Lori replied, Oh, Julie, you always make me laugh. It's quite a predicament. I can't date men unless I put myself on display, and I can't afford to date unless I'm with a man. Julie suggested, let's change the subject. It's so frustrating. How are the kids? Julie replied, they're doing exceptionally well. Charlie Jr. has just been promoted at his job, and Debbie is already in her 3rd year of college. Lori noticed, they're growing so fast, aren't they? Julie agreed, absolutely. Lori replied, Lance has a year left on his contract, but he is already thinking about re-enlisting. He really likes it. And how is your husband? Charlie's doing well. He's working hard as always. Lori noticed the confused expression on her friend's face. Curious, she asked, what's going on? Tell me. Julie replied, even more timidly, oh, it's okay. Lori insisted, come on, spit it out. I have a feeling that you are going to ask me something. Julie hesitated for a moment before finally saying, well, I just wanted to know if you've seen Skylar lately. Without hesitation, Lori replied, no, not since we filed for divorce. It's hard to believe that this happened 2 years ago. Why are you thinking about it now? I was just wondering if I should share this with you, but I think it would be better if you found out about it from a friend, Julie said. Wait, is he okay? Lori asked. Don't worry, he's fine. I ran into him recently, and we talked, Julie replied. Well, what's the news, Julie? Don't keep me waiting, Lori urged. Okay. Get ready. He's really going to get married again, Julie revealed. Despite the fact that Lori knew that their relationship had ended a long time ago, the news struck her to the core. Tears instantly welled up in her eyes. Her voice radiated deep sadness, leaving no room for surprise. "He's really an amazing man," she said softly, lowering her eyes in recognition. Reflecting on their past, she admitted after taking a sip of coffee, "I genuinely loved him. I really did. Unfortunately, the burden of unbearable bills and various difficulties forced me to indulge in self-pity. At that time, I was seized with a desire to distract myself from our problems and indulge in frivolity." Julia was silent, preferring to just listen. "Skylar proved himself right in all aspects, causing me to lose admiration for him. Perhaps I even stopped feeling affection for him. For a moment, stupid, I admit it. It was unfair to hold him responsible for losing his job. He worked tirelessly to ensure that we didn't lose everything. But my selfish desires clouded my mind. I longed for everything to match my personal desires," Lori confessed. "I have vivid memories of the time when Skylar suggested spending a weekend at the zoo, but my desire to spend the night in the city made me abruptly abandon his idea. Surprisingly, he was right about Jerry, the man he found me with at dinner. Skylar asked if I was going to sleep with Jerry. By the end of the evening, naturally, I denied it. But the truth is, I had every intention of doing just that. It's ironic, isn't it, Julie? If I had the chance, I would definitely do it differently. By the way, do you happen to know if Skylar still lives in that little apartment he bought?" "No, he left there quite a while ago." "I guess you weren't informed," Julie said, hesitant to bring up the subject again. "What's the latest news?" "Don't tell me he won the lottery," Lori joked. "No, it's not like that, but he managed to regain his former position at Vans. This happened sometime after your divorce was finalized. I believe that after Skylar's dismissal, their number of clients decreased significantly. Eventually, they contacted him and asked him to come back. After some negotiations, he agreed to their proposal. It's remarkable that he's making more money now than ever before," Julie informed her. Julie noticed a single tear rolling down Lori's cheek. "I'm sorry, dear. I shouldn't have said a word," Julie said, filled with remorse. Lori, however, shook her head and denied her guilt. "No, it's not anyone's fault. It's my own," she admitted. "I can't explain how many nights I spent going to bed thinking about him. I fervently prayed that these 2 years would be just a terrible nightmare and hoped that every morning I would wake up with Skylar lying next to me. But every time I opened my eyes, reality collided with me again." Lori carefully took a napkin and gently wiped away the traces of tears. "I'm really happy for him," Lori said sincerely. "If you happen to see him again, please tell him this on my behalf." "Of course, my dear," Julia replied sympathetically. The conversation quickly turned to another channel, and the girls began to discuss other topics. When they finally said goodbye, Lori pretended that everything was fine. But as soon as she got into the car and they stopped seeing her, she was overcome by the desire to cry. Story 3. On New Year's Eve, my husband discovered a deeply personal truth I had kept a secret. Our once harmonious marriage ran into difficulties, especially in the bedroom, which prompted me to look for alternative sources of attention. But I never intended to have an affair. One ordinary day, tormented by boredom and a sense of disconnection, I went to a widespread dating platform. Carefully protecting my identity by hiding my face, I shared images of my physique to avoid possible recognition. Surprisingly, I suddenly discovered that a lot of men were interested in me. Gradually, the desire to attract attention turned into a constant practice. Among the many reactions, one man caught my attention. We were well aware of our marital obligations, but our bond seemed undeniable. As our communication progressed, we eventually ended up on a date where our desires took physical form. From the very beginning, this marked the beginning of a passionate and fervent romance that lasted 4 months until the inevitable happened. Our recklessness led to the collapse when my husband found out about our secret date. I began to quietly invite him to my house, making sure that my husband was never present. It was during these secret meetings that the truth began to reveal itself, and the verity of our actions became inescapable, forever changing the trajectory of our lives. I didn't know that my husband had suspicions about my affair. I didn't know that he took matters into his own hands and set up a hidden camera to capture the intimate moments between me and my lover. When he finally presented me with irrefutable evidence, the shock that gripped me was indescribable. I was stunned when he unleashed an endless stream of hurtful words on me, words that I never imagined could come out of his mouth. Watching his reaction deeply shocked me and left an indelible mark on my life. The remorse I felt for the pain caused by my actions was immeasurable. In response, he insisted that I leave without delay, so I spent a week seeking solace at my mother's house, trying to escape the turmoil. After a few days, we finally had a conversation in which he admitted that he was not sure that he could overcome the scale of this betrayal. He has allowed me to temporarily return home while I consider my next steps, but since then, he has shown no desire to engage in any discussions, whether about cheating, our future, or the state of our relationship. He has repeatedly stressed that he has no idea how to get out of this situation. I'm fully aware of the enormity of my actions, and I am consumed with shame for what I have done. Just the thought of hurting him makes me deeply sad. The path to restoring our relations seems uncertain and full of difficulties. The weight of remorse hangs in the air, hanging like a heavy weight in the atmosphere. Despite everything that has happened, he still insists that we remain friends, and we manage to meet several times every day. I contact him, send messages to find out about his well-being, but there are times when I do not receive a response. There was a coldness in his behavior towards me, and he even asked me to move out again, and I'm afraid this time it might be forever. It's been about 6 weeks since I moved in, and the true scale and horror of my actions finally hit me with full force. I am clearly aware of how deeply he holds my heart. Without him, life seems aimless, and I accept the weight of my past stupid mistakes. He is my soulmate, and I'm ready to go to great lengths to get another opportunity. I long for the chance to demonstrate the boundlessness of my love, to regain the trust and faith that he once felt for me, and to fix our marriage. Is it possible to achieve this if he constantly avoids any form of discussion? I respect his need for space. I try not to push him to talk, but still, a feeling of anxiety begins to take hold of me. I'm afraid that over time, he may realize that he's better off without me. The uncertainty of what lies ahead and the desire to fix everything torment my heart. I turn to an individual consultant for help to figure out the reasons for my actions. Having deeply realized my choice, I realized the seriousness of my mistake and vowed never to repeat it with anyone. Despite this, at the moment, I do not know what is the best way to proceed in the future. I need advice on how to approach a conversation with a spouse who betrayed me in order to explore ways to restore trust and work on a possible reconciliation. The affair began with an online conversation that lasted for several months until we eventually met in person. Although we had many meetings, our relationship was mostly about physical intimacy, and I wasn't sure about its potential. Unfortunately, things got out of hand. I have to admit that my behavior was completely self-centered and motivated by irrational motives. The lack of intimacy in my marriage persisted for quite a long time, and our attempts to correct or improve the situation were unsuccessful. Combined with my low self-esteem, I was foolishly looking for someone to confide in, someone who could empathize with my problems. I let the situation get worse, even though deep down, I knew it wasn't what I really wanted, and it didn't bring me joy. A comment from one of the readers rightly says that understanding is only the first step. If I cannot understand the reasons why I preferred my needs over his and thereby put the relationship at risk, then it is vital for me to understand this issue. Without understanding the underlying reasons, it will be difficult for me to become a reliable partner, not only for him but also for any other person. Also, take time to reflect on whether this behavior is an isolated incident or is repeated in your current or previous relationship. It would be wise to seek professional advice in order to understand these aspects more deeply and better understand yourself. There are many valuable contributors on the Link platform who share their own way of introspection, which may prove useful. Finally, it is very important to carefully consider tips on how to behave with a spouse who has been betrayed. Improper conduct of conversations of this kind can lead to serious consequences, potentially causing irreparable harm. In my personal experience, this led to the dissolution of the marriage because my future ex-husband mismanaged the situation. I understand that there is a contradiction in my previous statement, but I want to emphasize that on my initiative, I sought individual counseling, which helped me understand my emotions and the underlying motives of my behavior. I sincerely acknowledge the seriousness of my mistakes and learn from them. I am genuinely afraid of putting everything at risk, and I understand how to delicately strike a balance between not being too assertive and at the same time fighting for what I want. The situation is difficult, and I want to act carefully so as not to aggravate it. I am determined not to spoil the situation, but I am tormented by the fear that I may be too assertive or not assertive enough. I hope this clarified my point of view. I would like to explain the reasons that prompted me to go on this journey. It all started with a stranger whom I met on a dating site and with whom, as it turned out, I trusted and communicated. Although I didn't plan for this to happen, I let the situation develop, and now I regret the choice I made. The moment I realized that I was involved in an affair, it was like a wake-up call, a necessary reality check. It made me think and reevaluate what really matters in my life, to distinguish fantasy from reality. I realized that the pursuit of an elusive dream put life at risk and betrayed a person dear to me. It dawned on me that this fantasy, which I was so zealously chasing, did not bring the happiness I so longed for. In my field, wealth is of minimal importance, but my partner in the novel, who has a very lucrative profession and aspires to more, seems to boast the opposite. It may be true that connecting with them will eliminate the need to be secretive, but that's not what I really want. I firmly believe that my husband, whom I have deeply hurt, is the person I am destined to be with, despite the fact that I am fully aware that I may not deserve this. I am ready to do everything possible to build a future with him. I respect his freedom of choice because it seems right to me, but the passage of time instills fear in me. Currently, I am actively seeking help from a psychotherapist, and it is important to note that my desire to reconcile is dictated not only by guilt, although I feel it. These reflections stem from a deep understanding of the extraordinary qualities of our relationship and friendship, despite the lack of intimacy. I am determined to preserve and elevate these aspects. I long for the opportunity to regain his trust and restore our bond by incorporating these crucial elements into it. This ordeal really helped me understand what I had, and I refused to live without him. We both reached the point where we gave up, and fatigue came over us. I understand that this may seem like a series of explanations. At a certain point last year, it seemed to me that we had become more like friends than a married couple. There were times when I genuinely thought about ending our relationship, and yet I realized that my greatest desire is to make the necessary efforts to restore our connection. I long for the opportunity to meet an authentic and meaningful relationship again. Living together after cheating can create many problems because it prevents the unfaithful spouse from fully realizing the seriousness of their actions. In addition, it can hinder effective communication, so it is very important to find a delicate balance to cope with this difficult situation. It is necessary to take such important steps as clarifying my husband's emotions, understanding his needs and desires, and determining what actions he expects from me. I would like to emphasize my understanding of the importance of self-improvement, demonstrate my willingness to understand the reasons for my past choices, and actively solve these underlying problems. It is very important to understand his desires and boundaries. I want to emphasize that I deeply care about his current situation, and I sincerely regret the pain I caused him. I want to clarify that I'm not blaming him, rather, I admit that we both lacked intimacy and that we stopped making efforts. I have repeatedly made attempts to openly discuss this issue, but I firmly believe that the lack of intimacy does not justify seeking satisfaction elsewhere. Now I realize that I should have made more efforts to get my husband to listen and actively participate in the dialogue. In the end, I should have chosen any alternative rather than resort to deception, but I have to admit that I made a serious mistake out of stupidity and selfishness. I decided to do so, which I now deeply regret. My actions have caused great pain to someone I care about, and it fills me with a deep sense of guilt. I am fully aware of the consequences of my choice, and despite the fact that I have created an undeniable mess, I cannot help but cling to a glimmer of hope that we can find a way to overcome this together. In recent months, I have realized that my husband plays a huge role in my life. It is worth noting that the other person involved in this situation is already married, and I decided not to disclose the details to his wife. I'm firmly convinced that such a decision is not within my competence. Although the idea that my husband might ask me to take a lie detector test seems unfathomable, I am willing to cooperate if it comes to that. Realistically speaking, I am not particularly optimistic about his ability to overcome this ordeal, and I fully understand its reasons. And yet, against all odds, I continue to cling to a glimmer of hope. It is very important that his wife finds out the truth because she deserves to be aware of the situation, considering that neither he nor my husband told her about it. The responsibility for revealing the truth now lies with me. Having entered into an affair with her husband, I made a choice and accepted the possible consequences. If I could accept these consequences, shouldn't I be willing to share the truth with her? I understand that honesty, even in difficult situations, is often perceived as sincerity, but after thinking about it for a long time, I decided that it was not my duty to reveal the truth to his wife. This decision was not dictated by the desire to protect my lover from trouble. This is my sincere personal belief based on what I think is right. Although I have not had a conversation with my spouse on this topic, I understand his preferences well and understand that this is not what he would like to do. Of course, I interfered in their marital affairs, but who can accurately determine the dynamics of their relationship? What conversations or arrangements have taken place? The mere perception of this act as morally correct is not necessarily consistent with my own principles. Besides, how can you be sure that she wants to be informed at all? Everyone should respect the boundaries set in their relationship. It is important to recognize that everyone can have their approach to restoring a damaged relationship. In my case, I intend to find ways to bridge the gap between me and my husband, but it is very important for me to state unequivocally that I made a conscious choice in favor of distance between myself and my cheating partner. Moreover, I decided not to involve his wife in this difficult situation. Currently, I do not know what to do next. My husband has expressed his disinterest in receiving any additional information and actively avoids discussion, pointing out a possible inclination to divorce. I sincerely ask for advice on how to take an active position and provide my husband with all the necessary support so that he can effectively deal with this situation. I'm puzzled by this situation, but I am sure that it does not pose a threat to my safety and does not increase the likelihood of repeated betrayal. My husband, whom I cheated on, has unequivocally expressed his disinterest in knowing any details about the person I was having an affair with. He does not want to discuss the other man, his situation, or any related issues. Currently, my husband has no desire to inform his wife about this, who was also betrayed by my act. I completely severed all ties with my partner and ended the affair. I have absolutely no desire to return to that world. What I did caused my husband a lot of pain, and now my main goal is to find a way to move on. I sincerely hope to regain the trust and love that my husband and I had before my betrayal. I will do everything to restore our marriage.